In December 2019, the Institute of Public Affairs published a video entitled, "What I Wasn't Told About Climate Change." In a separate video, I have focused primarily on clarifying the science behind their largely erroneous claims. While I believe we should be able to separate politics and ideologies from an issue like climate change, it's obvious that that hasn't happened. In this video, I will describe my political beliefs, because I think they will surprise you, and I hope will show that it is indeed possible to have something in common with the opposing tribe, so to speak, and thereby engage in fruitful dialogue. Please note that most of this video is simply my opinion or the opinions of others with whom I agree. Therefore, most of the video is not backed by sources. Now let's begin. I'll start by providing the Cliff Notes version of this video if you just wanted to get a taste of what I think. On Greta Thunberg, Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio, Extinction Rebellion, and so on, I don't like what they're doing. On those who deny climate change exists, I'll have to go through this one in detail later. On the idea about needing to destroy capitalism or hold a revolution to save the planet, I disagree. On the idea that climate change is a Chinese or globalist, Marxist, extreme leftist plot for power, I don't think so. On needing complete government oversight to solve the problem, I disagree. And on needing completely free market to solve climate change, I don't think that'll work either. I dislike what's being done by Ms. Thunberg, specifically efforts like her famous speech at the UN, where she verbally reprimanded the current generation of politicians and leaders for failing to act on climate change. I feel that such efforts are unhelpful at this stage, and the speech itself further emphasized a tone of condemnation and shaming that I believe isn't conducive to dialogue. I think that efforts like needlessly blockading roads while people are traveling to work, calling for the abolition of capitalism, holding protests for the sake of protesting alone, and so on, are not helpful either at the moment. I feel they draw attention, certainly, not to climate change, but to what looks like a bunch of noisy people with unclear motivations. I think it's the wrong kind of attention, and doesn't seem to be helping the problem, and has served to only dig a wider trough through the middle ground, which forces people to adopt more extreme antithetical views. Further, on the extreme end, certain environmentalists seem to have made up their mind that as long as you're driving a car or using electricity or eating meat or even just existing in some cases, that you're now responsible for destroying the planet and siding with large corporations as you do so. This misanthropic attitude is absolutely reprehensible, and importantly, I don't think it works. What a surprise that telling people that they're worthless or that they should kill themselves or that their very existence is a cancer on the planet isn't conducive to dialogue. My personal experience with so-called climate activists began a few years ago when I joined a university student group that tried to persuade the university chancellery to remove all investments in fossil fuels. I stayed with them for half a year and attended all the meetings in an effort to give the group a fair go. And while most of the people I met were very nice and very welcoming, I noticed a distinct lack of maturity, of resolve and understanding, of clarity and of direction. In other words, these students were very well-meaning, but I and they, I suspect, didn't know what they wanted and why they wanted it. The evidence for this, for instance, was when I proposed to put together a team of economics, finance, engineering, and science students to investigate the financial and practical feasibility of divesting from fossil fuels and reinvesting in sustainable energy solutions. This proposal was ignored. Students instead preferred to paint banners, hand out flyers, and hold small but shouty protests, and so on. At this point it dawned on me the commonality with what Ms. Thunberg and other such public figures were doing. Make a lot of noise and hope somebody else does the work. Now, some might argue that Extinction Rebellion groups have tried everything else and they have left with no other option apart from making a lot of noise. Now, I appreciate the sense of hopelessness. I was certainly there at one point in my life as well. And I'm certainly not saying that the responsibility for dealing with climate change is solely on consumers or that it's squarely on the government. The truth is, I don't know exactly where we put the mark. I partly agree with the feeling that we are at the end of our ropes in trying to convince governments or corporations to rapidly and adequately adopt more environmentally friendly practices, mainly because climate scientists have actually been warning of this threat for several decades with increasing confidence every single year. But I also appreciate that individuals and small groups of individuals have an undetermined power to change the world through small and humble actions, like the primary school children who drastically improved their school's recycling programs, helped cut waste, reduced energy consumption, and so on, all without needing significant government oversight. At this point, I can't help but wonder what the world would be like if people like Ms. Thunberg implored school-aged children around the world to encourage their peers, their schools, and their communities to engage in such programs. Again, I'm not saying that the responsibility for climate change is squarely on the shoulders of governments, or that all the primary school children in the world can singly help solve the problem. As I said, I don't know what the answer is. In this case, what I am saying, however, is that any discourse we attempt to have in politics or even between individuals will go a lot better if we stop trying to point the finger of blame at each other. To this end, Ms. Thunberg and alike have served very well, but I believe it is to the detriment of discourse overall. Having said all of that, I must emphasize that even though I don't approve of the efforts that Ms. Thunberg and others have undertaken, doesn't automatically mean that climate change doesn't exist or that all the climate science is bunkum. The climate is changing and has the potential to be a very serious existential threat. I don't dislike it just because I dislike what people do in the name of climate science. Just like I don't hate religion just because of what people have done in the name of religion. On the topic of so-called climate change deniers, I feel that the media has not been kind to these people. They are at an extreme labeled Holocaust deniers, but even mildly they are ridiculed, made to feel of inferior class or of lower intelligence, and so on. Personally, I've noted several exchanges online where people who accept climate change actively mock and ridicule those who don't. This isn't helpful, and again only serves to deepen the divide between people, forcing them to adopt more extreme views. I emphatically denounce these actions by the media or anybody else to ridicule people who deny climate change. As I previously mentioned, any discourse on a contentious issue will go a lot better if we keep our heads cool, avoid calling each other names, and just patiently listen to each other. It is bloody hard, and it's absolutely exhausting, believe me, I know. But it must be done if you're interested in reaching some sort of resolution to a conflict or disagreement, or even to engage in an amicable discussion that turns out to be fruitful. Again, what follows is my opinion, but personally, I don't hate people who don't believe in climate change. I don't think they're all stupid or selfish or evil or that they're trying to destroy the planet or whatever. I don't think that coal miners or everybody who works in the fossil fuel industry is somehow complicit in the destruction of the planet. I believe that most people are just trying to make a living and live a very normal and humble life, and there's nothing wrong with that. What do I think we should do? Well, we definitely shouldn't start by silencing people who deny climate change. We shouldn't ridicule them or do any of the things that I've already mentioned. Instead, listen to them, let them speak, and then calmly and patiently refute or discuss their points. Obviously, this takes time and a lot of effort. This needs to be done repeatedly, hundreds, maybe thousands of times. But based on some experience in the comment section of Potholder54's channel, it's clear that several people who bought into the idea of climate change as a myth are now convinced that it isn't, simply because, I believe, that Potholder54 calmly and precisely refuted many claims and myths surrounding climate change. The destruction of capitalism or industry entirely isn't the solution. As mentioned in the video by the IPA, millions of people have been lifted out of poverty since the start of the Industrial Revolution. We've built awe-inspiring infrastructure that now feeds and waters millions of people. Millions of people actually now have too much food to eat, not too little. Originally from a poor part of Southeast Asia, I deeply appreciate the significance of a simple action. Open a tap and the water flows. Flick a switch and the lights come on. Walk to the supermarket and there's food waiting for you. Stand at the bus stop and the bus appears on time. Think about the engineering and logistics challenges involved with doing any of these things. I believe they are magnificent achievements that's a feature likely of all societies that employ at least some amount of capitalism in their economic systems. Having said all of that, I believe that it is indeed possible for capitalism, or any system really, to tilt too far to one side, leaving vast wealth for very few people and dregs for the rest. However, entirely upending an economic system, i.e. destroying capitalism now, or revolting now, in order to restructure our societies and economies is, I believe, going to compromise millions, maybe billions of lives immediately. This should not even be an option, in my opinion. That being said, it doesn't mean that I consider climate change itself to be a Marxist plot to overthrow capitalism. Certainly doesn't mean that we can't make small incremental improvements to our economic systems in order to prepare better for the future. All I'm saying here is that we cannot burn down the house that we're living in just because there are a few loose boards or rodents scurrying around at night. I do not think that climate change is a globalist or Marxist conspiracy to institute a one world order. If it is, it's the worst conspiracy in the world because thousands, maybe millions of people have heard about it. A good conspiracy goes unnoticed, in some cases even by the conspirators or by those who think that they know what's going on. There also seems to be this idea that the Green Revolution is trying to impose tyranny. I can see where the idea comes from. What puzzles me, what is more tyrannical than a government that forces you to buy all of your energy needs from them? As I mentioned in the original response video, you must rely on the government for power extracted from coal and gas and nuclear energy. You must rely on the government to set up and maintain infrastructure to deliver that power to your house or your business. And you must rely on large corporations to extract and refine oil to provide gasoline for your car. But now consider renewable energy solutions, particularly solar energy. You rely on corporations to provide you with a few solar panels and a battery for your house, but after the initial purchase and setup, you rely on the sun to provide you with free energy for the next 25 to 30 years of the life of the panel. With little to no technical expertise, you now have a power plant in your own house. And how about this? You rely on corporations, certainly, to manufacture an electric car. But after the purchase, you can plug that car into an outlet at your house, powered by free solar energy. You are now relatively non-reliant on the government and large corporations for your power and for your transportation. I mean, how much further can you get from a collectivist tyranny than to allow you, as an individual, freedom? If climate change is an attempt to call for more taxes, I can see how that would make one think that this is a conspiracy to strengthen corporations and weaken individuals. But here's something I don't understand. The results of climate change, that is, increased proportion of large and very destructive cyclones, flood damage, drought, forest fires, rising sea levels, the rest of which are dealt with in the response video, means that millions of dollars will need to be spent on either repairing the damage or preventing it from happening. Tax dollars, by the way, the money that we give to the government. Finally, I don't think that complete government oversight or a purely free market is the solution to this problem. The reason I think this is based on Dr. Jordan Peterson's work when he explained how human beings are naturally part of a hierarchy of competence, where a few individuals are hyper-competent and capable of taking it all. While this is certainly great for those rare individuals, it's horrible for the remaining majority of people who might be forced to subsist on the scraps that the richest and the most powerful people throw down to them. A purely free market would allow the most competent individuals to rise to the top. So far so good, but it also allow them to set the price for essential commodities like energy and food and water. It would allow them to disregard any protections for the environment which in the short term may not be relevant or useful to them, but are obviously essential for life and for the billions of other people on the planet. In other words, a purely free market tilts towards tyranny by the very nature of the hierarchy of competence, and is tyrannized by extremely powerful people. Similarly, I think that excessive government oversight and regulations would stifle the market to the extent that these hyper-competent individuals aren't even allowed sufficient freedom to develop new technology or solutions to climate change that the rest of us could enjoy and use. So as is the theme of this video, I think a balance is required. One where governments are allowed to regulate to the extent that pollution or environmental damage is kept to an acceptable minimum, And yet individuals and companies are allowed to flourish and develop new technology. I don't know what that balance is or how to establish it. That's one of the many difficult problems that we need to solve in climate change. That concludes this video on my general political beliefs around climate change. Feel free to leave comments and questions in the discussion below. Thank you for watching the video.